buongiorno everybody, and thank you very much, Giovanni. I feel very humbled. I know I have a very long CV, but that's the nature of my career. Well, again, today we will try to look at the EU and Palestine. I have to make a couple of disclaimers. I'm not a university professor. I'm a scholar practitioner, so my presentation is not wow, but I hope that you will use it as a reference in the future. I will try not to read and just go through the things quickly. And I hope that we will have a debate. I mean, because I think that if you ask me questions, it will be much better for you, and I will interact more with you from my own experience. I mean, I always keep this flag because I think it represents me. I can see, maybe you can translate the connotations of the Palestinian flag in the way it is, but just putting it for the reference. So the plan for our discussion today is to go through the evolution of the EU's role in the Palestine-Israel conflict, how it started, where it is today, and whether there still is a chance to shift its course of action and influence the outcome of the conflict. I mean, I'm trying to also encourage you to think together about policy issues, because I can see that you are students of international relations, and I'm sure that we will be seeing you in different places in the world. You are the future decision makers in Europe and in the world. Because you are Gen Z, you are very special, and I feel very privileged to talk to you today. So, first comes first. I think that when we talk about the EU, and for me as a Palestinian, I always look at the EU as, in its normative value, as a moral actor, not only within the EU, but also the EU's role in the world. I mean, because when I first started to be interested in the EU, it was 30 years ago, even more, and I was maybe the first Palestinian to do training at the European Commission in the Directorate General of External Economic Relations in 1994, immediately after the Oslo agreement. And I really appreciated the EU's role to promote peace, security, prosperity, these very musical values that are somehow being lost in today's world. Okay. So again, what also attracted me to the EU is that it views itself as a bolster of a rules-based global order. I mean, things have changed, and I know that in international relations there's a lot of theorization, trying to explain why, what happened, and stuff like that, but I'm just trying to go through a chronological type of counting of where we have been and where we're going. So again, I mean, the EU's fundamental values of respect for human dignity and human rights, and all this, I mean, it provides it a mission to serve as a force for good and having a moral mission to the world. I think this is easier. So going back to looking at, I mean, how the Palestinians saw the EU in the early years. For example, during the 1950s and 1970s at the beginning of the EEC, I mean, there was not enough interest in the Palestine issue per se, and the focus was on Israel, of course, because of the post-Holocaust years. When it comes to Palestine, the EEC at the time followed the US. They continued to emphasize Israel's security and the refugee issue without engaging deeply with Palestinian political aspirations. So they used to look at Palestine and the Palestine issue only from a humanitarian perspective, which is not the case, which is not what we're trying to say today. So after the 1973 Yom Kippur war between Israel and the Arab countries and the oil crisis, Europe started to pay more attention to Arab and Palestinians' concerns. So, I mean, the turning point was in the EEC Venice Declaration in June 1980, and that was a distinct EEC position, or European position, if you can say so. It was the recognition of Palestinian rights. It was the first collective statement by the EEC, recognizing the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people, including self-determination. And this is very, very important because we will see later on that this type of position has eroded due to various reasons or factors. And then they actually recognize the fact that the Palestine Liberation Organization, as a representative of the Palestinian people, needs to be associated with any type of peace negotiations. And of course, the EEC continued to focus on Israel's right to exist and security within recognized borders. So at that time, with the Venice Declaration, the EEC, was ahead of the US. Because the US still recognized the PLO as a terrorist organization. So at that moment in history, the EU positioned itself as a normative actor, emphasizing international law, human rights, and multilateralism, which is very, very important because all those issues have eroded in terms of content and shape, the way they are being expressed today. The EEC had an autonomous and progressive line supporting Palestinian statehood. I mean, why is the Venice Declaration very important? As I said, it preserved Palestinians' right to self-determination and also warned against Israel's expansionist policies and based this recognition on the UN Security Council resolutions 242 and 338 regarding the two-state solution and the refugee issue, and also confirmed the Palestinian rights beyond the self-governing authority prescribed in the 1978 Camp David Accords. If you don't know about this, these were the accords signed by Israel and Egypt, and in that accord there was an annex talking about Palestinian self-rule. In that Palestinian self-rule, it was not a full recognition of Palestinian right to self-determination, but limited self-rule, which was later almost imitated in the Oslo agreements. And what I found most significant about the Venice Declaration is actually the EEC's willingness to resort to the use of force to implement the declaration and reach out to the Middle Eastern nations to initiate the changes. Like the EEC was ready to interfere, and that was something very, very special in this regard. So, evolving position of the EU during the 1980s, again, a rules-based solution. They consistently supported the idea of the two-state solution, and again, before the whole idea became a mainstream in international politics. And because also the resolution was a fundamental, of the conflict was a fundamental interest of the EU, basing the solution on international law. And again, this is the objective of the EU, is something that we keep hearing, supporting an independent, democratic, viable, and contiguous Palestinian state living side by side in peace and security with Israel and its other neighbors. So again, during that period, talking about a viable peace, but we started to see the erosion of the position. So we supported the Palestinian state based on the UN Security Council resolutions and international law, but we started to see a new rhetoric when they talk about mutually agreed minimal and equal swaps, with Jerusalem as the capital for both states. I mean, I have underlined the sentence mutually agreed minimal and equal swaps, because this was an erosion from the initial position that we need to have a Palestinian state on the borders of 1967. And later, I mean, the EU started talking about a negotiated agreement. I will talk about it later. So they started being aligned again with the US policy during the 1990s, especially after the Madrid Conference and the Oslo Agreement in 1993-95. So in a way, the EU lost its significance as a standard setter in terms of recognizing Palestinian rights, and they started following the US. So the role was somehow limited to a financial and diplomatic role. So, I mean, the EU's leverage declined. It was paying for peace, but had little influence over the peace process itself. So again, since that time, they continued to keep working on the ground, focused on making the two-state solution happen. And I mentioned that the shift became like, yes, I mean, we will support the two-state solution upon agreement that ends the occupation, an agreement between both sides. So we are not talking about rights and that the fact that Israel is an occupying power, but negotiations and agreements between two sides. Saying this while knowing that there's a very big gap in terms of power between the occupier and people being occupied. I mean, this was the dangerous shift in the EU's rhetoric and also policies in this regard. I mean, they kept recognizing the relevant UN Security Council resolutions, but then they started talking about dealing with both sides on an equal footing, which should not be the case. I mean, we have shifted from rights to negotiations, and then the EU started talking about parameters, I mean, new parameters between the parties, and also talking about security, I mean, securitizing the whole conflict, and not really taking care of the need to protect the Palestinian people under occupation. I mean, talking about negotiations to resolve also the status of Jerusalem, etc., but you will see later on that there's almost nothing left to talk about or to negotiate about because of Israeli policies. The second shift was, or the turning point in the EU's position was during the second uprising and the second Intifada, and also post 9/11, and the beginning of the war on terror. I mean, we saw that security narratives dominated within the EU, and the EU struggled to maintain a coherent stance as member states diverged. For example, you must know, I mean, I'm sure you know that there's a divergence between northern and western European states in terms of their position, and central and eastern members. And then, I mean, those aligning with the US more, and those who are sympathetic with Palestinian status, such as Ireland, who has a colonial past also, and they can understand the Palestine issue. And then, after the 2006 elections in Palestine, when Hamas gained the elections, the EU adopted sanctions, and they actually played this big role also in having the roadmap, which was a conditional type of roadmap for Palestinian statehood. And at that moment, I mean, it was in 2006, and I was much younger at the time, and I started thinking, my goodness, like, on a personal level, I started feeling that the EU was not being sincere about its own values, because they were pushing for democratic elections. And the result that Hamas gained the elections was because we had democratic elections that were actually celebrated by the EU. And it was very perplexing to me to see this kind of incoherence in terms of rhetoric and also policy. So, I mean, we know that the EU's normative rhetoric was undercut by inconsistent policy and internal disunity. I mentioned something about the roadmap, and I would encourage you to have a look at you know, what it meant at the time, because again, I mean, the EU became a member of the Quartet, or the Roadmap for Peace, that was actually initiated by the US, but then the EU somehow gave up its role as a distinct actor in global affairs, and they actually undermined international law, because the Quartet became sort of another layer of a grouping of international actors away from the UN, even though the UN was a member of the quartet. So to me, this was sort of either an underestimation of the significance of maintaining international law, or just trying to be coherent and led by the US and being nice to its policies. So, despite all this, the EU tried to continue to be neutral. But again, when we talk about neutrality, this is also very dangerous, because we are talking about a clear situation of occupation and annexation and etc. So, when it comes to diplomacy and to real politics, we understand that it is true, but it is very destructive on the long run. Because whatever rhetoric happens, and then it becomes institutionalized, and then new generations come, and they don't know the truth, and they think that that was the only truth, and this is very scary. Because not all of us, we afford to really look for the truth. Even now, I'm sure that with your generation, you use a lot of AI, and sometimes, how can we really trust this type of information if we don't really look and dig deeper into historical facts and understanding that type of decision at that type of moment in time, what happened, why this has happened, what were the dynamics that led the EU to take such decisions. So during the 2010s, there was more frustration and fragmentation and more conditionality. The EU became, a player that puts condition on the Palestinians more than on the Israelis. Although they started to adopt the differentiation methods, for example, or measures such as labeling settlement products and issuing a lot of statements. But again, the divisions rendered the EU more reactive, bureaucratic, fragmented, often issuing statements rather than shaping policy within the EU and policy vis-à-vis Palestine and the region. This type of relevance continued with more marginalization of the EU as a real actor in the conflict, because they were trying to balance their act within the new regional dynamics. For example, especially after Trump's first time in the American administration with the Abraham Accords, which are like normalization accords, where the US wanted to normalize relations between Israel and the Arab countries without resolving the Palestine question. For example, before 2020, before the Abraham Accords, most of the Arab countries did not want to have normal relations with Israel based on the fact that they are still occupying Palestine, and they did not allow for the establishment of the Palestinian state. So they were pushing for these accords, and to look at those accords, they have a lot of very strange and scary connotations when it comes to having relations between Israel and those Arab countries, because they entail a lot of complex matrices of control, and many of them include securitization of the region, dehumanizing the Palestinian, and trying to build a new awareness, especially within the Arab young people in those Gulf countries, like changing history books, controlling curricula, all within this type of normalization. And this is very scary, because they are playing on the factor of time, and they want to create a generation that does not see Palestine as something important. There are even people in the Gulf states, young people like you, who think that it's okay to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque, because Israel is digging under the Al-Aqsa Mosque, thinking that this is the third temple that they need, which is, it's outrageous. And this also explains somehow the frustration that we all have, especially like you, Gen Z. You don't see that the youth in the Arab and Gulf countries, or even in Muslim countries, are connecting more with your struggle, with your awareness when it comes to objecting what is happening in Palestine. So again, internal division continue, and they render the EU's position as almost irrelevant, even though the EU continues to to finance the Palestinian Authority and also to finance a lot of work of NGOs like human rights-based organizations that show the Israeli violations to international human law, etc., etc. This is a table that summarizes this, the EU position during the various stages. So, I mean, in this slide, I try to explain why I see that the EU made mistakes and where did it go wrong. And this is somehow based on extensive analysis of the EU's position in comparison to also the historical background of the Oslo agreements and others. So the evolving EU policy toward the Palestine question had three, or still has three difficult issues. First, I mean, from 1980 until today, we see that the EU abandoned its position as the Venice Declaration articulated, basically preserving the right to self-determination and having the right to also act against the Israeli expansionist policies. The second is that I think that there was somehow a shallow understanding to assess the validity of the Middle East peace process and the EU's role in the post-Oslo era. And the third is that the EU yielded to a narrow interpretation of the facts on the ground. Whether intentional or unintentional, I think it had a lot of negative consequences. And I will try to show how very quickly. When it comes to the Venice Declaration, I mean, the rhetoric started to change to recognizing a Palestinian state when appropriate. So the Palestinian state was not a de facto consequence of exercising the right to self-determination, but when appropriate, that we need to decide together if the Palestinians deserve a state. Well, statehood should not be something that is conditional, because statehood is something that depends on the right to self-determination, and it is granted by international law. So, I mean, that was a very sad kind of erosion of its position. And I mean, following the Venice Declaration, perhaps you can spare more time to also look at the Seville Declaration that reckoned that the parties on their own cannot find a solution, and there's an urgent need for political action by the whole international community. So the whole international community, and not like having the EU become a member of the Quartet, which is a parallel type of body that is undermining the UN role or international role. Again, this is the issue of, the negotiation on the approach was devastating to also having a strong EU position. When it comes to the failure to assess the Middle East peace process, because, and I also invite you to look further into the concept of land for peace, not only for negotiations, but also the concept of land for peace. Because the concept is very tricky, and this has been something that was embedded into the Oslo Agreement and also in further, Israeli understanding of how they see the relationship with the Palestinians. We give you land if you give us peace. But what is happening, what has been happening, especially after the signing of the Oslo Agreements, is that Israel was taking more land and was requesting the Palestinians to be completely pacified. So if you are objecting to the expansionist policies, this means that you are a terrorist, forgetting that the people under occupation have a legitimate right to resist occupation, even in violent means under international law. So look more into this thing. I wrote a lot about this thing in my PhD thesis. So again, they did not want to intervene, to enforce. The EU kept the rhetoric, but again, they did not want to intervene as they have stated in the Venice Declaration. And I've said my opinion about the Middle East Quartet. So while we talk about the peace process, we have the continued occupation, more than 57 years, of Israeli military occupation, but also continuous failure of the EU or the UN to protect the Palestinians. Sorry. And nobody is holding Israel accountable. And impunity continues. Continuous violations to international humanitarian law and human rights laws. And since 2 years you have seen watching live genocide. 90% of Gaza's current population of 2.1 million people has been displaced, facing genocide, death, hunger, and annihilation. I also forgot to put a point regarding the West Bank, because in the West Bank there is an ongoing, creeping annexation, where they are actually taking more and more land and disconnecting the West Bank and not making it viable for any future Palestinian state. So there's also a continuous politicide, and this is a term that not so many people use. I learned it because of a book that was written by an Israeli name historian. His name is Baruch Kimmerling, who wrote about the Palestinian, about the Israeli politicide. And politicide is it's a stronger term, more strong than genocide, because it's an annihilation of a population's political, cultural, economic, and also national being. And this is what is actually happening, because in addition to the genocide, there's also a lot of strong attempts through a very complicated matrix of control to wipe out the awareness of the Palestinians, making them subhuman, terrorists, etc., and not deserving of normal rights. So what is also more dangerous during this time is that there has been attempts also to end the role of the United Nations refugee, the UNRWA, which is the UN refugee organization that has kept the issue of the Palestinian question alive. Not to make it look as only a humanitarian issue, but make sure that when we talk about Palestinian refugee rights and the right of return, this is a political role guaranteed under international law. But unfortunately, there has been strong attempts started by the US and Israel to end the role of UNRWA, because for them this will mean the end of any kind of claim for the right of return. Because for Israel, the right of Palestinian return is an existential threat. Because if you talk about the right of Palestinians to return to their homes, this means that Israel is illegitimate. And I come from a family from Lod, where my mother's family used to own the whole land of the Ben Gurion airport. And they were thrown out of their lands with nothing. So we can never forget. I mean, there is a new reality, but we can never forget this reality. So, I mean, it's very also unfortunate that, I'm sure you have seen that there was a lot of action with the International Court of Justice and the ICC rulings, and the EU action was not very strong as an EU bloc. And even though there was a rising recognition of the state of Palestine, it remains symbolic rather than practical. I mean, this is how the map of Palestine looks today, which is very scary. Nothing is left to talk about. When we talk about the EU position to support this, the two-state solution based on a negotiation approach only, while we're trying to negotiate with a party that does not even want to negotiate. This is how Palestine looks like. So, again, the problem is that I don't know whether it is true that we can call it as a narrow interpretation of facts on the ground, or really not willing to really say things the way they are, because everybody knows about the Zionist project that intends to ethnically cleanse Palestine. And actually the current war in Gaza is somehow a decision to complete what was not completed in 1948. because the ethnic cleansing is also happening in the West Bank, not only in Gaza. And I'm sure that you have seen live pictures of the genocide. I mean, it's true that there are some measures that the EU has taken against the settlement products, but there hasn't been any strong efforts to really take a stance and sanction Israel. And this can be done through the EU association agreement with Israel, because EU association agreements are really based on on EU values and norms, and not, should not be preferential only to Israel and apply to other countries but not to Israel. Again, there is double standard, as you know more than me, when it comes to the EU positions regarding Ukraine. And this all led to a marginalization of international law and international institutions, presenting unity over universal values that the EU stands for. So, I mean, I just wanted to shed some light also on the EU's support for Palestine and or for the Palestinian Authority, that they just unveiled a multi-annual comprehensive support program, 1.6 billion euros, but to me it makes no sense. I mean, I would rather have an independent Palestinian state that can generate trade and independence rather than and have normal relations with bilateral EU, because we're going to be very entrepreneurial, we're very highly educated, so I don't want charity and I don't want aid, but I want real capacity to do trade at will and not be dependent on international aid. So, yeah. So, I mean, I've given some examples about also how the EU saw the issue. I mean, trying to have a neutral side, but always siding with Israel. For example, I wanted to remind you that at the beginning of the war in Gaza, post 7th of October, we saw the European officials going to Israel and claiming the right of Israel to defend itself, but without any limitations. But since then, there was no European leader that went and visited Gaza. I mean, even after all this genocide, which talks about the double standards. But what are the findings that not only me I talk about, but academia and analysts and normal people, have really found? And I was just having a discussion with friends regarding the absurdity of having the West or EU member states still considering Israel as the only democratic country in the Middle East. It is not a liberal democratic state like the West. It is an exclusive Jewish state because of the Jewish nation state, the Israeli nation state law in 2018. As I said, they are continuing their ethnic cleansing that they did not complete in 1948. They still have expansionist objectives, and this was actually clearly mentioned by Netanyahu a couple of years ago in his UN General Assembly address, where he showed the map of Greater Israel that included Jordan, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and even parts of Cyprus where I'm living now, which is actually happening. The problem, the biggest problem is not only the live genocide, but actually the attempts and the strong schemes to reformulate the Palestine narrative, okay? And also influencing the awareness of the young generation that is in solidarity with Palestine and change their understanding, pacification, securitizing Palestinians and criminalizing the Palestinian right to self-determination or to resist the Israeli occupation. And they have created a very strong culture of fear. For example, it is not only, depicting Palestinians as subhumans and terrorists and uncivilized. It's also what we saw on live social media, how the Israeli soldiers are dealing with Palestinians, especially in Gaza. They have been celebrating killing Palestinians. It is live on social media, and this is like, I don't know how to describe it. And definitely, even though they are making it look like a war between good and evil, it is not, because we know what the evil is. So all this, and we are still facing, the problem of not holding Israel accountable to its facts. So I want to specifically mention the issue of Gaza because I know that, after the 7th of October, a lot of more awareness has become present in the world and the growth of the solidarity movement. Just a reminder that this conflict did not start on the 7th of October, justify or not justify. And as you have seen in social media, after the 7th of October, there was a lot of incitement, even for a lot of media, especially in the West, asking that, it is the Palestinians are terrorists because they started what happened in October 7th. But it was not, because this is a continuation of a long struggle or against occupation. And by the way, just a footnote in this regard, I know that a lot of information was regarding the number of death tolls in the Israeli side on the 7th of October. But I urge you to look also at Israel's Hannibal doctrine, where actually most of the people who died because of the Israeli airplanes and raids over the Palestinians who went into the settlements, because the Hannibal doctrine says that Israel prefers not to have hostages. They prefer to kill their own people rather than have hostages. And there's a large number of Israelis who died on the 7th of October because of the Israeli air raids. And not so many people talk about this thing, because I still think that we're short in terms of narrating what actually happened on that day. Again, you know that Gaza is only 41 kilometers long, 10 kilometers wide, but it has been destroyed 10 times more than the destruction that happened in Hiroshima. So I wanted to show you a picture of, there's a lot of pictures, even more representative of the destruction, but this is how Gaza looks like. Gaza has no universities anymore, has no churches, no mosques, no schools, no hospitals, nothing, which is, I don't know how to describe it. So, I also wanted to remind you of the ICJ. It was a good point that the ICJ started working on trying to prevent the genocide. There were public hearings where 52 states presented legal arguments, and there were countries who joined. But the EU's position in the ICJ was not very strong. For example, for the EU, the court's opinion was backed by the EU but criticized by the US. It was backed, but not really a strong support for the, to try and look at the recommendations of the ICJ would be to try and stop genocide. So for 2 years we could not stop the genocide. The EU did not really help in stopping the genocide. Where a lot of people say also not being able to stop the genocide means that you are complicit. And lots of EU countries continue to support Israel with armament, such as Germany, Italy, and others. And it was absurd. To me, it was absurd. And we all know what happened with the International Court of Criminal Court. That they were, they tried to a request to issue arrest warrants for Netanyahu, and many European countries are not recognizing the ICC, and they will not really, practice this type of ruling. I also need to remind you that somehow, in addition to the weakening side of the EU commitment to the ICC or the ICJ ruling, is that the US refuses the ICJ ruling, and they threaten people to, they're threatening judges and etc. And they are, the US and Israel are not party to the ICC, and that also weakens this type of sanctions. With all this, we know that there was an absence of clear messaging or policy. Okay, urging to stop the genocide, but not really putting an end, even though there are some outliers. In Europe, we still have hope. I say that I do not see strong leadership in the EU, but when I look at some leaders like Dominique de Villepin, who is trying to become a president in France again, or Spain, or Ireland, I feel good, and I hope that they can be a new uniting force within the EU. Of course, if we look at the erosion of the EU position vis-à-vis Palestine, we understand that there are structural causes, and I'm sure you know more about this: the institutional concern, constraints, ideological diversions, transatlantic alignment, and also Israel's deepening integration with EU economies, and other issues like the rise of national politicization. But there are also there's reasons for the erosion of the EU normative power in Palestine, which is something that I started to talk about in the beginning. Internal divisions, perceived double standards, over-reliance on declaratory policies, and limited leverage, especially when it comes to having economic relations with Israel. And all this, when we look at the EU, we need to also contextualize it with what is going on in the world. I'm sure that we had a month of lectures trying to understand what is going on. I have listed few points that I think that there are very important in this regard, and they help us understand also why the EU's role is limited and not being fulfilled to the best. International system in transition, erosion of the leverage of the United Nations system and the international law. There's a widening gap between the global south and the global north. There's more radicalization, supremacy, rise of new powers, amplification of the right in the world and in Europe. The left is weak. I still fail to understand why there are not counter forces that can bring a better narrative that can express the majority's positions rather than the minority ruling the world, and also the EU. There's a widening gap between the people and governments, and of course I don't see enough strong leadership in Europe, and I hope that you will be able to fulfill this gap. And the most important factor also is the growing efforts to create a culture of fear in the world. We are living in a surveillance-dominated world. AI and more, everybody is watching us, and I have seen this type of issue becoming more prominent, especially with the growth of the solidarity movement in the West and in Europe, where students were being under surveillance, they were intimidated. A lot of people in the US, for example, they were pictured when they were going to demonstrations and they could not get any jobs anymore. So those are the circumstances. But again, maybe in all this type of complex context, there's a good positive effect of what I call the Gaza worker. I think that we have more clarity about the falsity of the Israeli narrative today, and this is very important. Even though there is continued impunity and lack of accountability, but there is more awareness. I think that what might be also shifting and helping us also to diversify our efforts to have a better resolution of the conflict is that there is an erosion of the unipolar moment, but this depends on how we act on it, how your generation and the Palestinian generation acts on the newcomers in the global system, and how we can make better alliances and fight for our own case. We know that there is double standards when it comes to Ukraine and Palestine. And the most important effect to me is the rise of the Gen generation, aligning themselves with justice, human dignity, but this should not stop here, and I will talk a bit more about what we can do. I was trying also to make this presentation not purely academic or historical, and try to have to give it a policy orientation. And I think that there is a path for the EU to regain its normative authority in global affairs and also in Palestine. Basically, being more strategic, transforming rhetoric into enforcement, showing unity and communicating consistently, especially when it comes to international law and human dignity. There are other factors that make the EU become a normative power. And it's based, rule-based legitimacy, the civilian power, the conditional aid and association policies, consistent endorsement of the two-state solution, and also advocacy for international humanitarian law. There are practical steps that I have listed down, that we can look at them more. We can come back to them and discuss them later. The most important thing is what I think that you can do. The generations, and which is the heart of the solidarity movement for Palestine. The most important thing is to transform the moral energy into institutional policy change, strategize, be persistent, focus on understanding international relations, international law, the EU, and national political systems. Cultivate a new political generation. You need to decide that you will become the future politicians and transform realities and become change agents. Why am I saying this? Because you can base your work on a knowledge-based approach, and this is very important. And this is what I really recommend: is that it is true that you have had your awareness through social media, but dig deeper and work more. Work more on looking into things and doing the hard work. Use social media and information and AI, but dig more. And work more on documenting violations, working through EU institutions, also working through your own institutions. I know that there are international students, not only from the EU. Focus on EU entry points, focus on examining all the EU instruments within the region, especially with Israel and Palestine, and also reclaim the power of narrative. Use the digital storytelling to humanize Palestinian life beyond the crisis, and counter misinformation. This is very important. So again, how can we look at the future? We need to really understand the dynamics of the current global context, reflect on the internal dynamics in the EU. For me, as a Palestinian, and I know maybe you have not lived this experience, but I think that it is very important for the EU and also the West to reconcile the past, present, and future beyond the Holocaust date, and stop being fearful of being accused of anti-Semitism. Because I'm a Semite. It's not only the Israelis are Semites. And understand things much better than how you are being fed this type of information. Think of the next generation in Europe. Sometimes your politician, unfortunately, will not think of you. They only think of how to extend their positions and hanging into politics. And imagine a future of Europe beyond the legacy of the Marshall Plan and US dependency. And unfortunately, I still see Europe being attached to the US rather than having, a more prominent role as a global actor. Is it possible? I think yes. It's a long road, but it's your choice. At the end, this is an image that I really like because I don't know actually the painter. I thought it was Suleiman Mansour, who was my favorite Palestinian painter. But it tells it all, that Palestine will rise out of the ashes, which means that we will continue to exist and we will rise again. I apologize if I have been wrong, but I thank you for listening and I'm open to your questions. I really hope that I was up to the expectations.
Okay, so let's open the floor. Please. Icebreaker, yes.
First, thank you for your great lecture, and I'm Jewko from Poland, here on Erasmus. And my question is, because we've seen what you said as the moral correct attitude, we've seen it being represented at the protests, marches, and all. But how can our generation really actually transfer the energy and the feeling to actual action and change? Because I don't see really those marches. Maybe they bring some, I don't know, the knowledge and the general perspective of the issue among the broader society, but then again, we don't see any real material actions taking place because of those movements. So how can we, maybe this is also a question to the audience, maybe we have some activists among us, but how can we actually influence the people in power? Or how can we enter into a power, maybe, to actually make some change? Because the feeling is broad, the representation is really huge. We could see in October in Italy, I arrived on the 3rd of October and I was stunned by the amount of persons on the protest. And then yet, I don't see really for example, the flotilla that turned away, the military flotilla of Italy, right? Correct? So how can we translate the feeling into the actual action and influence? Thank you.
Okay. We'll take more questions?
One by one, or should we collect?
As you wish.
As I wish. Let's collect. Okay. 3 questions, okay? 3 by 3. Silvina.
Thank you very much. As far as I know, United Kingdom recognized Palestine state. We'd like to know what is the position of Palestine with Malvinas Islands in United Nations. And the other question, probably you could know, if you want, you can not answer me. But in 1992 and 1994, in Argentina, we were victim of 2 terrorist attacks for the Jewish community. In my country, we are living in peace. There are a lot of communities, Jewish, Arabian, Muslims, Chinese, Russians, Ukrainian, Armenian, and I remember very well that day in 1994, I was very feared because of the explosion. Probably this is history, and you are not obliged to answer to me, but why Hezbollah attacked in my country, and if it's Hezbollah support Palestine? Thank you.
Okay, third question. Where was it? Here, yes. Okay.
Thank you. I'm Christian from Greece. I want to ask you, the last couple of months we've seen many European countries recognizing the state of Palestine, but in practice also the majority of the UN states, the vast majority recognize the Palestinian state, but do you think that if there is nothing happening in practical happening, this recognition has some worth? I mean, just recognizing a state, does it, if you still allow Israel occupying Palestinian territories and the settlement is growing. Also, the European Union cannot find a common path for sanctions to Israel. There are some states like Germany, which, because of the past of the Holocaust, is not willing to even recognize or put sanctions to Israel. So my question is, do you think that the recognition of the Palestinian state by European states have a real impact in the conflict?
Please.
Thank you. For the young guy from Poland, I think that I tried to tell you how, but I didn't want to talk much about. There are practical steps. First of all, I was telling Professor Germani that, because I don't have children, so I don't know how people like you feel. And I'm glad that I'm trying to learn more about you. And this is very important because there is continuity between an older generation and your generation. And I was telling him I used to have this lovely relationship with my parents because we both learned from each other. So I have a gap in this regard. But I'm very happy because I work a lot with young people like you, and they are all becoming leaders. I mean, most of the people who I have worked and I have led, they are becoming even more important than me in my other work. So the first thing is that you have to believe in yourself. I mean, and I've said, you are here to study international relations, and you are here as being part of the future EU generation. You have to start believing in yourself. Don't take things at face value. Always dig for truth. And there's a lot of instruments, and actually your generation is a lot more stronger than our generation because you have the world at your hand. You have access to information that we could never imagine. But you have to be very picky. You have to think of yourselves as rights bearers and not only people who are being led by your politicians. Your politicians are there because of you. So you have to claim your rights, first of all. You have to organize yourself. You have to get involved in local, national, and international politics. And you have to be the change you want to be. Of course, there's a lot of ways, like working in NGOs or think tanks, or even in political parties, but again, dig for information. I know it is very difficult for a lot of you to travel to Palestine, but you have to make the effort to go and see for yourself, because it is different. So I'm not a propaganda person. I mean, when I talk about Palestine, I speak from the heart because I'm Palestinian. But maybe you need to be more sure, and you need to see for yourself. I can give you facts. But you have to dig more. In the presentation, you will see specific steps that you can do. But again, believe in yourself and be the change you want to be. And don't be passive. It is not empathy. Needs to be complemented with action. And today you have a great opportunity to focus and base your policies and action on evidence-based. Everything can be based on evidence, and you have access to evidence in every way possible. On the second question, I mean, I have to tell you that I'm not aware of this incident, but it is for this exact reason that when you look, with the lens that you have now, you have to look at, to use it exactly to look at what is happening in Gaza, that we are against violence. Palestinians are peaceful people, not the way the world depicts them. And it is very unfortunate that, especially after 9/11, I mean, Palestinians were being criminalized as terrorists, but we are not. We are freedom seekers. And there might be other regional forces who have used the Palestine question to do things that might be wrong, but in the terminology of resisting the occupation or whatever, there are violent means, allowed, but we need to really know the influence of those means. For example, I can dare to say that I'm very sad of what happened in Gaza. Of course, there are people who say that the Gaza effect was positive in terms of raising the awareness because the people of the world were awakened, but why do we need to have a genocide to have the world being awake to the struggle of Palestinian people for over 6 decades? We don't need to see people killed. We need reason, we need values, we need universal human rights. Anyways, this is what I can say to you. Regarding Yasu, the person from Greece, I try to speak Greek, and my Greek is etsikesi, but I agree with you. It is true that there was a rise in recognizing Palestine. Before what happened in Gaza, and when I was almost your age, I was very much against this type of seeking recognition of statehood, because I thought that we were focusing on diplomatic issues, and we were not actually asking the exercise of the right to self-determination. What comes first is not the state. It's the right of self-determination, which means an immediate end of the Israeli occupation by force of international law. So we were drifted away with this type of diplomatic recognition, especially after the Oslo Accords. I have my own theory, because the Oslo Accords did not mention at all that at the end of the agreements there will be a Palestinian state. And there has been sort of a dissonant cognition in this type of issue, where we Palestinians, we created the semblance of a state because it was our wishful thinking, and we established ministries, etc., thinking that, but that gave the wrong impression, because during the Oslo agreements, we were still under occupation, but we were talking about a Palestinian state. So for a long period of time, the world was behaving with us as if we were a state, which we were not, because we were still occupied, including all the areas of the Palestinian Authority. And hence, when the people started to say this is wrong and we need to defy the Israeli occupation, we became terrorists. You see? So back again, now I'm trying to see things with a more positive lens, even though everybody is using this thing. I think that it still remains symbolic, but it is good. At least there is a universal consensus of the right of Palestinians to have a state of their own. It might make the understanding and the practice of self-determination in a twisted way. It might delay it, but it is still positive. I have learned through time to appreciate every single effort towards a scheme, not to underestimate any effort. So if we have this symbolic recognition, then fine, but it cannot stop here, and we need to continue. Bear in mind that many European countries did this type of recognition as a way to appease the growing solidarity movements within their countries. And yet, the recognition, the new recognitions of France, Germany, I think, and the UK, is conditional. Inside this recognition, there are embedded conditions for the Palestinian Authority or the Palestinian state to do a lot of things, including changing the educational curricula. Changing educational curricula means that we need to eliminate our history and our recognition of any connotation to the right to resist the occupation or martyrdom or etc., normalizing Israel as a state that is not an occupying power, and other issues. So it is not something that is given as a gift. It continues to be conditional, which is again defeating the whole purpose of the right to self-determination that should not be conditional as stated in international law. Okay?
Okay, second round.
Thank you very much. I am Klimis, also from Greece. I wanted to ask you a question with regards to the Gaza peace plan. I would like you to evaluate it from the perspective of a Palestinian. I want you in particular to focus on the stipulation of potential reintroduction of the Palestinian Authority in the Gaza Strip, because it was one of the aims of the Gaza peace plan, but it was again, as many things you mentioned, shrouded with conditionality, and all of the plan is very ambiguous in general. I remember back in 2020, Donald Trump did mention that for the Palestinian state to be normalized, it would have to accept some very strict conditions. For example, they would not be able to use the International Court of Justice or the International Criminal Code and bring cases in front of the courts against Israel. And also, they would not be able to participate in any international organizations or sign any treaties without Israeli acceptance, which I wonder if is still the case for the Gaza peace plan, in case it goes through. And also, a very related question, because you mentioned politicide, and I do wonder the opposite of that, polit building, and how in building, yes, how to, for example, the European Union could effectively aid in the solidifying and organization of substantial structures and institutions, not providing aid, as you said, but actual substantial help in the Palestinian state for it to be able to function better.
Thank you. I mentioned something about the roadmap for peace, in 2002, and that was a conditional. It was just after the second Palestinian uprising, when the Palestinians said this peace process is a fake and we will work against it. And the EU became party to the quartet, Russia, the UN, and the US, and it was conditional, but I remember well because I used to work as an advisor in the Prime Minister's office, and when I evaluated it was like, to me it meant regime change, because they wanted to create a new administration again and getting rid of Arafat, who for the whole international community represented Palestinian rights and the right of return. And the second thing was also to eliminate any kind of resistance of the occupation, basically Hamas. So the Gaza plan, the new Gaza plan, is a worst reflection of the roadmap with continued conditionality. But as you said, the conditions, the whole idea is to pacify the Palestinian population. You say that a state, but remember very well what the US or the EU perception or the Israeli perception of a Palestinian state, which is nothing more than what is happening now, okay? And I remember when I started working on Palestinian statehood, I looked at Rabin's statement in the Knesset right after the signing of the Oslo Accords. And he said what he thinks of a Palestinian state. A Palestinian state is very limited self-rule, that with Jerusalem not being its capital, not getting rid of the settlements, not giving the Palestinians power over resources, and no return of refugees, which is, and no borders and demilitarization. So this type of conditionality continued and even worsened, especially after 9/11, when the whole world became securitized. And I urge you also to look up something called clean break doctrine. that was developed during the 90s, late 90s by neoconservatives, including Netanyahu, where they actually orchestrated how the world would look like, creating the new enemy after the fall of the Berlin War and the fall of communism, political Islam, and breeding new terrorists. So this Gaza plan is sort of like a normal continuation, but worse. The conditionality is to completely pacify the Palestinian society, accept what you get, and actually it goes along with what the Israeli Minister of Finance said, and like Smotrich and Ben Gvir, who are very much genocidal in their statements. They have three options for the Palestinians. Either you accept to continue living in complete subjugation to the current situation, which is apartheid, control, ethnic cleansing, genocide, or we kill you, or you leave. Those are the three options. And the Gaza plan is somehow within those parameters. I mean, if you say, okay, we will recognize, I mean, it's not recognition. The Gaza plan does not have any horizon for independence or even independence, like or economic independence, etc. And also saying that you should not do the ICC, the ICJ. And actually, unfortunately, in many times, the Palestinian Authority, ceded to these types of conditionalities in several cases. I remember, I don't remember the year, I think it was 2007, 2006. There was a ruling, the ICJ ruling against the apartheid wall, and the Palestinian Authority did not continue the case. I mean, the case was really put through Palestinian NGOs, and they did not really act forcefully because they were under pressure, because we're not independent. If we are living by aid from the international community, and if we still think that the US will solve the Palestine question, then we will concede. It is not good, but I mean, for me, the only good thing was that they stopped, they were trying to stop the genocide, the massive killing of people. I mean, the killing did not stop, but it is a bit less. I mean, I still feel guilty when I go to sleep every night, but at least there is no massive killing. And we hope that things will be better. But it's not going to be better if we continue to all depend on, the guidance of one global actor. It is not healthy. This is why we need to revert to the international law. And this is why your generation is very important, because the EU's universal values are embedded within also the UN system and international law. So if we move away, this means an erosion. And I mean, it is hard for me to see a world that is governed by jungle. By the rule of jungle. I mean, my days might not be as long as your days. I mean, you have to think about it this way, because if you do not take a decision regarding Palestine today, you will be the next victims. Each one of you will be the next victim. Nobody is out of, I mean, it's not something that is exclusive only for the Palestinians. You are all victims of this rule of jungle, not only the Palestinians. And this is why I think that whatever is happening in Palestine should be a wake-up alarm for the whole world. Yes.
Ben? Yes.
Hello. First of all, thank you very much for your presence. I think it's really a privilege for us to hear you and meet you. And I just wanted to ask you, do you believe there are other solutions to the two states solution? I'm very aware that there is not a solution until there is a genocide and illegal occupation. So, but if one day, do you believe in this solution of the two states, or because I personally also believe that maybe just one state with equal rights for everyone Jews, Muslims, Christians, and so yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I will tell you the only joke that I know. I'm not a funny person, but this is it. I mean, I remember, you know, the late President Arafat used to be very keen on having a Palestinian state. So he was trying so hard, like, with diplomacy, with negotiations, etc. So one day he was so frustrated, so he decides to go directly to God and ask him. So he goes to God and asks him, I mean, dear God, can you please tell me, is this Palestinian state going to happen during my time? So God looked at him with pathetic eyes and told him, go home, my son. I don't think this will happen during my time. This tells you a lot. The situation is very complicated. I mean, there is a solution, of course, if we enforce international law. I'm not depending on Israel's goodwill, because at the time, at this point in time, Israel feels empowered by total impunity. And they're actually doing a lot of bad things also in the region. Look at what they're doing in Lebanon, in Syria, and other places. And nobody is holding them accountable. So if I'm going to talk about the solution, whether it is a one state or a two state, it doesn't matter what type of solution we have. What matters is to have accountability, stop Israel's impunity, to force Israel and also help the Israeli people see facts on the ground and look at the Palestinian other with the human side. The problem is that they don't see us as humans. They don't see us as deserving to be. And this is very important. Can you imagine that the total majority of the Israeli population were for the genocide are still, you know, you have to look at the numbers and their polls. I mean, it's true that they had demonstrations during the hostage crisis, but the majority is for ethnically cleansed Gaza and also the West Bank. And so, if we are talking about a solution and we look at the current generation, people your age who are living in the settlements and who are actually being extremely aggressive against Palestinians, even in the West Bank. I'm going to Ramallah for Christmas and I'm afraid to move around. I don't know how I will get from the Jordan Bridge to Ramallah without being intimidated by settlers. So again, there has to be, we need to stop this. You see, when Israel realizes that Palestinians are equal human beings, all kinds of potential solutions can happen. I mean, we can share the land. I mean, there are many Palestinians who strongly believe in the 1967 borders, but I showed you the map. I mean, it doesn't exist anymore, but then if we decide that Israel has to dismantle all the settlements, we can have a Palestinian state, and within those types of, like, side by side, like the EU states, with Israel living securely, but accepting the equality of human beings. And then we can think of multiple solutions of cooperation. I hope I gave you a convincing argument.
Okay, so maybe a last question, otherwise we can yes, the last one, Nicholas.
Well, my name is Nicholas. I'm also from Argentina, so I'm glad to meet you in this place of the world. First of all, nothing. Thank you for encourage the youngest generation. Also, I'm a supporter of your cause in Argentina, like Paul and Guy say a few minutes ago. I understand that it's very difficult to talk about the Palestinian cause in only 2 hours in a very brief lesson, but also I have to mention that Hamas is not only a terrorist group, maybe it's also a social organization because they are developing healthcare, education, they are maintaining the social relations under the Israel bombing Gaza. So maybe for the young people coming in the future, also we have to deconstruct the concept of terrorists, you know. I think all the countries around the world, Europe, Latin America, Middle East, have to have this duty, have this task for the future. And for me, this is most important thing you mentioned, deconstruct this concept. And my question is, like my colleague mentioned recently, recently we have an important conflict with Iran and Israel. It's not only with Iran and Israel, I think it's a conflict in the Middle East. And also the plans for Gaza not include the social organizations or the people or the leaders in Palestine or in Gaza. So how we can solve the problem without including the social movements or the leaders of your country? This is a problem, another problem for me also. And recently we have the Abrahams Accords, no? So the things change a lot. The Abraham Accords that I don't know, Trump was the protagonist or was the principal actor to pursue like these accords, changed a little bit the circumstances of the alliance in the Middle East. The allies that Palestine maybe could develop. So my question is, the efforts that Abbas are making, the efforts that you mentioned you are making, it's possible that under United Nations another actors appears, another actors come out, like China, like some countries of Europe, not the entire Europe, not the Commission, all a sort of countries. It's possible that a new agreement of peace with different countries like Iran, China, Turkey, also some of European countries. Is this the path? Is this the way to a new solution of peace?
Thank you.
There is another one, the last one, the very last one.
I will be brief. My question is, you presented how the European Union started good and then slowly abandoned all its efforts. And my question is, what are the interests of the European Union in not supporting Palestine? That's it.
Lily.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for both questions. For the first question, I'm very happy that you are actually making this statement, because we might differ on means of defending, national rights or the right to resist occupation. I'm not for violence. Nevertheless, this is a right given under international law. I have my own theory that I cannot discuss in public about this thing. But then again, this is very important because this is very promising, that you are not taking things at face value and you are having an opinion of your own. And for this, we really need to protect international law. We need to protect the EU, and even more than the EU. Because I care about the EU, because for me it represents a moral organization. I am very much European-oriented. I studied in several European universities, and I travel more in Europe, and most of my friends are Europeans, and I look up to Europe. But what is more important is that your generation demands the EU to protect the UN. Look at, the UN has been weakened a lot. Its organizations, its funding, and there's no respect to international law. This means that we will live in a world of jungle. I mean, we're talking about the erosion of the unipolar moment and the advent of other multiple players, but the EU is not counting much in this because they are very busy trying to deal with the Ukraine issue. And I'm humbly speaking, I think that this has weakened the EU's role as an economic and global power, because they're digging too much into, I mean, I don't know, they are being driven to something, and they are focusing more on armament rather than continuing to be a normative power for the EU and with the neighboring countries. So dig deeper, claim this, and it is up to you. I mean, Iran, this is all important. I would like to imagine a beautiful world, not like the world that is, Jeffrey Sachs keeps saying that we are approaching the moment of the nuclear, third world war. You can stop it. Why should you keep silent? Why should we continue? The problem is individually, I think. It is hard to understand what is going on because there's a lot of things happening very fast and very quickly and very strong, and you don't understand where it is coming from, and the matrix of power is very scary to the world, and we're not able to even react. But if we think thoroughly and we focus, we have to figure out the way. You have to protect your future, not the policymakers. That's my answer to you. And regarding your question, this is the problem, is that because of the structural problems within the EU, and because of the internal divisions, and because of the inability of having a coherent policy, and trying to match rhetoric with action, the EU has been weakened. I think that the EU, as it started in the Venice Declaration, was very sincere, but the EU today is not the EEC before. The EU is having different political influence, different interests, a lot of transatlantic and Israel association, a lot of forces inside. There's a lot of right-wing politicians within the EU institutions. The growing far-right in Europe is not something that happened just like this, but there's a lot of influence even within the EU institutions of this that is making the EU diverge from its initial normative power as a moral power in the global order or in the Palestine question. But then again, it's up to you to make the change. Thank you.
Thank you all of you.